Well, our panel today is on well-being, and I just realized that well-being is such an exciting and complex human possibility that not just a few people are interested, all of us are interested, irrespective of our age, irrespective of our occupation, irrespective of where we come from. So fundamentally, this panel wants to question or raise issues among all of us. That one is, how do we define well-being? And I think Emily's wonderful presentation also brought in a lot of other issues about the source of happiness and whether it's conditional or unconditional. So how do we define well-being? Because I guess we are also bombarded by ideas such as happiness, pleasure, well-being, contentment, satisfaction, right? We have several words, but can we perhaps have a discussion on the basic need of human living, and if that is contentment, how do we connect it with our day-to-day existence? I also thought if we can connect it in some way to the transformation contentment can bring to our consciousness, that also would be interesting. So perhaps I think we have how much time? Maybe I should... 1 hour. 1 hour? Total 1 hour we have. So perhaps if we can do a task, I mean, if all the other panelists agree with me, since we have heard the words well-being, contentment, happiness, pleasure, satisfaction, perhaps we can go around the table to pick your favorite word and you say what it means to you, right? If that's okay?
Okay, I think contentment is a very important one. And because if you always desire something and there's no... So if you always desire something and then it brings attachment and there's no limit how the desire can extend, so then in that way, so our mind actually become the boss of all, So far actually we have been as a servant of our mind, and we need to actually control it and be a boss of your mind. And so far, we haven't been actually doing everything, based on what our mind tells us. And we need to contain it, because if you do not be able to contain it, then you want something more and more, and then you just go after that, and then in that way you create more problems. So I go for that, the contentment.
Maybe I won't talk directly about any of those words. Perhaps it may make sense. I think you mentioned about that we need to control our mind, and sometimes I find it helpful to think of mind not as an information processing device, which some of us always do, but in terms of mind itself as a control system that we need to understand. And I think I find it very helpful to think of going back to, for some of you are familiar with science, Norbert Wiener's notions of cybernetics and the notion of we as a system. And if we think of mind as a control system, definitely a very complex, I think of it as a nested hierarchical control system, then it's probably easier to think in terms of notions like contentment. So even if you think of a simple feedback control system like a thermostat, there are two things that are very critical. There is an internal setting, that the kind of thing that you want, the goal, desire, whatever you may want to call it. Then you perform certain actions to achieve it. Then if there is no match, if there is an error, and that error is very critical. So one of the important things is that in a feedback control system, the feedback control system tries to minimize the error. So one way of thinking about it, if you can predict and if you can keep your expectations down, if you can achieve those expectations, your error will be very low. presumably it's a simple way to think about maybe that is what will lead to contentment. It's not really what you expect, it's really achieving those expectations, and as long as you can keep the error zero in some sense, then maybe that is what will get us close to contentment or happiness. I don't know. That's probably one simple way to think about it. I will just put it out in the open and for people to comment on. Thank you.
Thank you for that rich way of thinking about it that was also very tangible and palpable. So obviously everyone expects that I'm going to say happiness is the word that I like, but really we chose happiness because it's a word that is very universal in its appeal. I know that not everyone understands happiness as having the same meaning, but I think there is an intuitive sense that people want happiness, and everybody agrees on that. Subjective well-being is a psychological term that is used as a proxy for happiness, and there are various sort of questionnaires and scales that will measure someone's subjective well-being, and that again, it's supposed to be an index of happiness, but there are also happiness scales. I think happiness defined very closely in the way that Geshe-la defined contentment is the way I would think about it also. I think we just have to think about happiness according to the real causes and conditions of happiness, and not according to some other beliefs or ideas that we have that are actually harmful.
Well-being is such a word that it does not have any synonym. World Health Organization, WHO, defined health as physical, mental, social well-being. Physical, mental, social well-being, and not merely absence of disease. This is the definition of health adopted by World Health Organization. So well-being means that being healthy. It does not have any synonym. So well-being, well-being means being healthy. Now, physically healthy means your organs are in harmony, systems are in harmony. Mental well-being means your mind functions, components of minds are in harmony. Since morning we have been talking of harmony. And physical, mental, social, the others also has self, others also has mind, others also have physical body. So these are in harmony. Then this is social health. And then WHO has also added another dimension on the insistence of Indian scientists, that is spiritual well-being. That is also included, but in bracket. It is a physical, mental, social, and in bracket spiritual well-being is health and not merely absence of disease.
Tan nangi dirchit tam ta dingar koin bate shi yer tang nang yerchen li so nang yerchen te dra chibu chada yore sang tinra in tam nang yerchen te 그런 거 용fon들 적고 또 됐다 식전지그리나 연락 ዝ미지그리서 식전지겠나 그런 식전라 후에서 그 그런 야지 컴퓨터 통하여 그래서 그런 ዝ미지겠나 식전지금 그 ዝ미도 야지 컴퓨터 통하되 그거를 한 거서 그런 거 밀그때 식전지그리 연락 ዝ미지긴 받대 사르 받나 조금 때 마인비 쓰기나 텔라인스 그 Jimjik Checheta Kerchambora Tangas. Sarpi Muni Tandaina Nip Marungi Kualentaina Koron Zikin Chigos Tangios. Kaizana, Yana Gansi Tapon, Yana Lapi Tapon Tondira Pachila, Muzenda Nungo Tangas. Tinda Chigamande, youngster of Sutila, Jimjiro. Nambochi go Trangas. From my point of view, when we talk about happiness, harmony, and well-being, I think that it is important to talk about or look at the relation between subject and the object. And when we talk about subject, and we need to think about what it is. And first, it is important to recognize what subject is. Is it a physical phenomena? Is it a non-physical phenomena? If it is a non-physical phenomena, how it can be disturbed or influenced by physical phenomena. And when I listen to my neuroscience teachers, from the scientific perspective, they talk about brain and neurons and the neurotransmitters. And from their way of explanation, it seems that subject is also trying to explain by physical means. So I think that we still need to kind of discuss and talk more about subject-object relations and what it is, what is subject and what is subjectivity.
Gege samsushin da susu karse rujong jajong mando thone ane deta don zo kola ya ngonzin jedang dan deshi jedang mando mobuji leban na shingi ngarang roji na namba gi karse urta rujong chegi da thawaji bichane ti deta gi zo do de ngazu penna rewa roji kushu ge sabenji tanni delyan rwa michi jege 같이 레와 제바 임바이는 된 가르쳐다 용타 메바지로 된다 임바 손자 수수수수기 주대단 지위니보데 야보지 못 제바 토네 아니 단계 기실라 손바나지 대춘 초시신디 치데 준딩이 내루디 슈차보 모심비 토네 아니 데이터 주베기 탈람도 초바 임바이나 아니 다다지 가르쳐 올마서 렌데 난신지 유엘이야 기기 선수들이 쉐이 도시나.
So I think when we talk about happiness and well-being, since we came from different cultural and social backgrounds, we may seem to have different ways of describing and different definitions for these terms like well-being and happiness. So as a Buddhist monk, who is trained in Buddhist philosophical traditions, from my point of view, it doesn't matter whether it is happiness or well-being or any kind of like mental or physical phenomena, we have to recognize what is the cause to have this kind of mental states or whatever it is. And if you recognize what is the cause, then we can tell what it is. For example, like for every phenomena, it has a definite kind of substantial cause, and one particular kind of substantial cause will lead to a similar substantial similar result. And so, if you know these relationships well enough, then we can have a better understanding of these things.
Ta tanda di detap yoba number shebale nga jushi di thola tangrang do gi samju shewa na detap lai di tanda nga di number shebala na mendo sem la na mendo yi la na mendo tela chigle chikde tela maten rang deng de chagar theng do tela maten be nga sem ba ye number shebala maten be gi nga de dewa che da detap chi jun tu re den sambang mendos 가르친 나나 아주 지당 남주 베베기다 렉제 요르서 지용라 단다스 텐데기 대답 좀 봐라 삼바 상나사다 남양 상스 삼바 녜나 사다 남양 녜스 탐제 삼바 달라라라 베 군장 삼바 달라 쯧나 계스 텐데기 대답 용에도 쪼데 삼바 달라라 그래서 텐데 주시.
So I think that when we talk about well-being and consciousness and existence, for my point of view,
it is consciousness is the most important thing, and well-being is depend on consciousness. Whether you going to have physical or mental well-being or not is very much depend on what is your mental state, and so it comes from a peaceful mind.
당에 동문점 쉬어인스 다 디기 생에데 아니 탐해버저 무슨 탐절 디기 거레스 안 디기게다 용서 쪼더버디 아니 류다 나다 이 숨고톤다 디기 중고레스 아니 류 아니 디기 무중 금전 차차 안 도스파 아니 등산 멤버당 같은데 아니 다 무시오지 아니 류 아니 기디기 체도 도스파 tunje 다 룰강에 태베나 안델라네 팬베쳐도 가르치고도 도스 맹간들이 캡틴의 최고레스 다 생기디기 생기디 난 섬을 그 토하는 중국어로 모두 치기는 초기에 제가 상게데 생기디기 tuntu 말스 생기디기 난게 섬을 고거스 계세 난게 섬을 되기디 tun마토베나 아니 단념 발생 차도거스 그래서 내기 되기 생은 소데 아니 류체 셈체 나 다포가셔도 양즉 심푸된 것도 나와 맞기용서도 된다게 찬도고 근데 신내야 개겐다 파마다 된다게 람들 체체 아니 보고 되긴 되기 아니 동네데 마시야다 되기 디아 투야게 체도 아니 파마게 람들 체체 개겐게 람들 체체 된다게 왕게다 되기 도스야 투야게 안데 맹아데 요레스 다 아니 담아파트 성저 되는 송샤레스 아니 최놈 이기 랑시대 이내 조심을 줘 켈때 이때 랍당 메사네 체계론 텔라티 대와톱스 저선 대와 생각이 남당 가르모 거시나 되지 다 간제다 이기 대와대 당 두스 툭 손나까지 령아 예수도 툭 디자스탄 되네지 안 갖는 거 같다데 최놈이 지스나 मन सभी प्रवृत्तियों का अंगुआ है मन उनका प्रधान है when मन से ही उत्पन्न होती है वह दिने जगह ने धम्मपद में ऐसे लिखा गया है अन्य दिने सुनो शास्त्री ने सिम रांची दिने शास्त्री सुना.
Yeah, so when talk about happiness, it has to come from both body, speech, and mind. And so for physical happiness, it has to come from physical means. So that's why we have these hospitals. And for mental happiness, it has to come from something related with mind itself. That's related with that, he has a quotation from the Dharmapat. It's kind of a Buddhist text. And so, yeah.
Thank you very much. I think each one of us, what we have talked about is worth a 1 hour lengthy discussion, but since we don't have time, but these are fundamental issues like the subject-object divide and understanding subject-object divide, and of all three, the consciousness is more important, and the quality of your mind decides your well-being. So all these are very important questions. But I don't want to miss the young girls and boys who are sitting behind in the questions which they raised at the tea time, and I want to bring those questions to the panel, and perhaps so that they can also have some responses to you. Well, I would combine their questions and a little bit tie up with our panel, and so that we can make it more meaningful. So if I paraphrase some of the issues they shared with me, is that, okay, let me put it like that, and perhaps I can go around the panel once again, but very briefly, each one taking a minute or so for a response. For example, a happy person, or let's say a contented person, can he feel jealous and angry? Number two, there's one more thing. Can a contented person feel lonely? I know these are not very, but I think they deserve some answers, some responses from us.
There were two questions in your one question. The first time you asked it, you said, can a person who is happy or contented or peaceful feel jealous, angry, or lonely? And then the second time you said, can a truly happy person feel jealous or out of control, angry, or lonely? And those are really different, because the average person who I think has a good level of happiness, I would say yes, absolutely they can feel angry, they can feel jealous, and they can feel lonely. And their anger might motivate them to act on behalf of an injustice. That's very important. If something unfair happens in the world, it is okay to be angry and to use that to fuel a behavior to reconcile something that's unfair or unjust. Earlier, one of the geshes talked about, and this is an extreme case, talked about someone in a position of knowing that one person is going to harm thousands of people and taking it upon themselves to kill that person. So I don't know if I have a strong opinion about that, but it does suggest that even the very happy, the exceptionally contented and peaceful person can get aggressive when it's necessary. So I think they still can. Will they spontaneously feel it as frequently as people who are not happy? I do not believe so. Will they get carried away? As you said, will they get out of control? I don't think so. I don't think that's likely.
So the question when you ask, can contented person, get jealous? So when you talk about the containment, I think, the containment has a, certain degree. And to have a really, full contentment, and I think that person has to have some sort of, ability to control their mind. So once that person has some sort of ability to control their mind, they may get angry, they may get jealousy, all negative emotion, but less than other people who are not very much contented. So these, the mental controlment is very much, affect each other, influence each other, very much related to.
A truly happy person, as ma'am said, or a content person, very difficult to get him jealous of anything. And that part, I think, to my level, that if I am content, I will not be jealous of anything. That part is all right. But to become angry, whether he gets angry or not, yes, I agree. If my contentment is disturbed, I'll get angry. And for a greater cause, as you said, the society's contentment is disturbed, I'll get angry and I'll take weapons against them. Krishna did it. Lord Krishna did it. So, even a content person who has controlled mind, everything he has controlled, for retaining its own contentment, he may get angry, and for a greater cause of the society, he may get angry. Now, third question, whether he ever feels lonely. Of course. Of course, he will often feels lonely, and that is why all creations are there. A content person wants to create another a breed of content persons, so that I know I am not alone, I am not lonely. God created the whole universe because of this only. He is a content person, but he created all these things because I was one, but I want to become multiple. So loneliness he feels, and out of this loneliness, the whole world is created, whole sect is created.
Well, again, I think what we have raised are very important issues. Well, of course, the truly is a kind of addition which I brought, but I don't think when we talk about contentment or happiness in its real sense, it doesn't mean it's comparative or superlative. There's only one contentment, which is not based on degrees. So such a person, I think I completely perhaps agree with Dr. Mukhopadhyay that a truly contented person perhaps can become angry but may not be jealous, because jealousy is wanting, not being satisfied with what you have and not very satisfied with what other person has. So basically that. But friends, I think these are very serious questions, and these are existential issues. And I think it's very important that at the same time we are struggling with philosophical issues, scientific issues. I think it's very important to bring in these day-to-day life situations in front of us and analyze them openly without many blinkers, So that's one way of looking at it. Well, I want to bring in another question which was passed on to me earlier, is that other than meditation, is there another way to treat a depressed mind? Because mostly health is unbalanced, or depression comes from unhappiness due to too much consumerism, too many things, too many material things. So other than meditation, is there a way to treat a depressed mind? I don't know whether if any, one response to that is, I think you wanted to say, yeah, please.
Depression is a disease of self, when self gets disconnected with the environment. Meditation is one of the ways to manage these depressed patients. You ask the depression patient to do gardening. You ask the depression patient to do something where he can connect. You just have a conversation with him and find out to what activities he can connect himself. This disconnect is the cause of this depression. Now, if you can dig out from his mind that with what he can connect himself, this will be the way out of this disconnection. So meditation is only one way. There may be many other ways. I gave one example, is the gardening. Many times you connect with the pet, many times you connect with the plants, many times you connect with different types of environment, different types of people. So you may get depressed with some people, but immediately the cohort is changed and you immediately get connected with those people.
Maybe a little philosophically, I think it's also important to bring the point which Rinpoche brought, which is to understand the subject-object divide better, because meditation is basically trying to understand, trying to observe what's happening, right, in your inner space. So even in depression, if we can be awareful, observe what's happening inside us, that's, I think, it's a nice beginning. So to distinguish between, or to ask questions, what is that which is in you which is depressed? Or try to understand the cause of it. So those are some ways. But I think, as again Dr. Mukhopadhyay said, since I am also interested in farming and gardening is an excellent way of being happy.
I have a little bit reservation being a doctor with these meditations. You see, a surgeon who has been operating for 8 hours on a patient, is he not meditating? A simple phlebotomist who draws blood from the patient in just a technician level or an attendant level, he has been drawing blood of 100% just continuously one after. Is he not meditating on that? What do you mean by meditation? Meditation on what? You see, we use this word meditation in a very diffuse way or gross way without any definition. Particularly being a doctor, I have seen these doctors are mostly healthy without doing any meditation, particularly the surgeon, the cardiac surgeon, the neurosurgeon. Hours after hours they operate. Is it not meditation? There is a bit reservation on this definition of meditation.
아니 샤주제 내가 안지고랑이 아니 샤주제 내가 링라 고랑이 대랑이 심바티 못내요 그래서 니안 곰지를 두고를 송송 딩가랑서 낭추에서는 림바미로 니요 그래서 자금도 조금 왜냐 낭추기 소바죠 내가 소바쪽은 당니 랭기가 니게 아니 봉바 미다고 두두가라 봉바 미다고 바이까 진짜 삼노단 디고 조금만 두고 그래서 디당한다 거기 숨겨난 지과래서 니 암지지기 아니 취득이 링라 아니 네바딜라 샤주 당도가라 그 semba darangi semba temunne dungala kola di jegom doju dugo res
Yeah. So his response. So when we talk about meditation, we can talk about analytical meditation and single-pointed meditation. So, for example, if a surgeon is doing surgery for many hours, and if he's very attentive towards his work, it is kind of a meditation. So, and when we talk about analytical meditation, when the people who are even debating with one particular topic, say the impermanence nature of a pot, then at that time we say that he is analytically meditating on the nature of impermanence of the pot. So literally meditating is nothing but paying focused attention to one particular object or the topic.
I think the panel theme which we have selected for this evening is not very simple, because all the words which we have used, the keywords, well-being, existence, and consciousness, has a lot to do with what we are currently discussing. So just to bring that back to your focus. And I think there's one more question which is slightly provocative on meditation, and I think for that reason we should perhaps raise it. I can put this question in different ways, so perhaps let me try this. Instead of perhaps doing meditation and learning meditation using textbooks, traditional textbooks, how about being more compassionate to animals? This is the question someone has raised. Anyone wants to take?
Tiwa go so tandadi. Dinguen de marda tiwa tandadi. Dizo lengangi yue. Gom gi tone kejeshe mo wache energy ki jita ki energy ki cheja siginere energy lob nezu shila shaje ene simjin dinzo la energy nyingje ki tone enita chamjong chitang khandes che gures.
देख तो लाते हैं हमारा केर के समझ शुचो अंता न्याम तक समझे मंगू शुचो जो सुने चेते गुआरे अन कंसोल कंगे चेते गुआरे संजे ता कंसोल कंगे चेते अंदर कोसो अन डेवलप टेम्पे अन कंसोल दे अने कंगे डेले ट्रेलर तभी चेता सुसुक चेको गुआरे ती चेवाला अल तंगो दे चेक अने शी संबा जोरवा थर्टू संगे शीत इंजिमी सांगो बोतोस शी एने बे समझन मिक्चे अने न्यामदा बे समझन देला मिक्चे ता आओ को कांगे शोजु कांगे देला थाया तबे चेतुना समके दिंदे के अने शिपिकेला न्यामदा बे समझन देला मिक अने शिने दि समलो खोर अने जोरो संदता लेगा छेचे अन थर्टू अने पिके के समझन देगे अने कांगे दे सेल तो भाई 아니 딱 뭐는 되네 아니 딱 냠다가 심진된 도스 겹도 그래서 어느 된데 이제 당가랑 트레이닝도
So I think basically what he is saying that for that if you take closer observation of the kind of situation that these animals in and what kind of sufferings they are experiencing, and if you reflect upon their conditions and sufferings, then I think you are in a better position to have these suffering animals.
Earlier, one of the panelists, I think Geshe Namgyalji, raised about what is fundamental to contentment. So is consciousness, I think G, right? Is consciousness fundamental? So here is a question saying, what is the basic source of happiness? Is it consciousness? So the basic source of happiness, where do you derive happiness from? Is it from social interactions? Is it fulfillment? I mean, these things I'm extending. The question here is, what is the source of happiness? Is it consciousness? To understand it better, is it emotional fulfillment? Is it social appreciation? Is it accomplishment? Is it being respected by another person? So what exactly is it? Or is it consciousness? And I think as Geshe said, is it consciousness, which is something very fundamental, and if I pardon me using for this philosophical jargon, which is ontological, which is fundamental to your core being, if we consider that as consciousness. So true happiness perhaps comes from that core being of what you are. Perhaps that's what this person has asked. Anyone want to respond?
I'll give a quick response. I think that consciousness is much bigger than happiness, because you can be very depressed and be conscious. You can be very angry and be conscious. And maybe my way of thinking about consciousness is narrower, but I think of it as some degree of conceptual awareness of what's happening inside and outside of yourself. As in terms of the research on happiness, I still think that it's really arising not from one source or one thing, but from a combination of factors. And that is very much like most other things. They don't come from one thing. They come from multiple different intersecting harmonious factors. And from my assessment of the literature, happiness comes from an easy capacity to experience positive emotions, a willingness to experience negative emotions but recover quickly from them, an inner awareness, whatever you want to call it, mindfulness, meditation, some awareness of one's inner workings, and a strong, connected, safe, interdependent sense of community with others. So I think all of those together are what comprise a happy way of engaging with the world.
Ngazo da jidang degi dewara degi lana dewara donga ni shingwa. Tanga zo nangbi thone shewa na dewara donga lai de ngazo tse dila ni chik dewara donga khari chunga de chasang ngazo gi le la ra la res le gyuri shingwa ngazo le gyuri. Tinde gi thande gi dewa chunga de zo de da ngazo gi tse nga chi de wi chane. Tse nga mi tse nga ma ani ngazo gi lega ngemba shedani migewa chewe jumsengi an sedilani dunga nyonga shedang ani tsengoma ngazugi gyudi penecha shanata yagboje da sangboje mix dewi chos gewi chos dang yo jumsengi sedila dewa nyonga zo ngazugi le gyudi chansha gres chidang ani de sedila yang dewa nyonga thamje diang tsengame ge gyujen la rale gyula rale gresna
When we talk about happiness and sadness, these are mental states. And when we talk about mental states, then where it came from, when we ask this question where it came from and why we are having this kind of mental states, then we have to talk about the law of causalities. We believe that these mental states that we experience in our life are because of other cause and conditions. And when we talk about what are the cause and conditions, then we need to talk about not only this life, we have to talk about the life before this life, and then we talk about these actions that we have committed in the previous lives. And then if you say that what is the cause, then I would say the positive actions that we have collected so far is the source of happiness that we have.
I think one question which brings in what we just heard and what other panelists have shared is, and I think it's important to discuss and think about it, if not in this panel, some other time, or in our private offices, wherever, which is happiness a mental state? Is happiness an emotion? I think that conceptual clarity is very important. Is happiness an emotion, like sadness, anger, etc.? Or is it a fundamental state? I think with that clarity would help us to discuss more about other issues which we are discussing, but I don't know whether we have time about it. I personally consider happiness not as an emotion, but something which is much more fundamental. That's why I would like to equate it with contentment and hence unconditional. What do scientists consider more important? Internal happiness or external happiness? Narayanan.
I'm not really sure what the terms internal happiness and external happiness means. Presumably, if happiness is something to do with mind, a person, then obviously that is impossible. So there is only one happiness as far as I can see, and as a scientist or as a human being, I would say it's important.
나르궁군이 나라 따람 피데르치다 능가 데르치니기 너네 조테 능가 데르치다 그렇지 못하면서 데르치텔라 피데르치다 능가 데르치니요레스 테니기 너네 닝군이 능가 데르치다 어떤버서기요스.
We can talk about happiness comes from external things, and happiness comes from inner things. And if you compare these together, then I consider inner happiness or the happiness source from your inner states are more important and more valuable.
I think the danger in relying upon external happiness too much is that the sources for external happiness will be depleting, is in an order of depletion day by day, and we may not have any much sources of external happiness. So better be trying to look out for something which is more internal and be happy irrespective of whatever is available externally.
But just to respond to that, I think it puts one question versus the other question, because that clearly means you have to make a subject-object distinction, though, between internal and external. As the other person said, if that distinction goes away, then there is no internal or external.
Yeah, I think that philosophical divide, and that is why I think this panel theme on well-being is very much connected with existence, you know. So what is the demarcation of subject-object divide? And is that binary stable? I think that question is also important. When we make that binary of subject-object, how far can we go of the subject-object binary? Does it at some stage, we may have to take them as a whole, as organic? I think I should be talking less. We are coming to the end of this panel, and I think we tried to bring in many issues, but as we could see from the questions and the panelists' remarks, I think we all agreed that well-being is complex. Definitely it is connected with our daily living and thereby our existence. Any comments from any panel, any panelists?
I wanted to bring up one idea that I think relates to this relative importance of internally derived happiness versus externally derived happiness. There's a construct that Western psychologists have been studying recently called self-compassion. And the reason they have come up with this is because it seems like for some Western people, they seek happiness by getting affirmation from external sources and by always trying to achieve things that will satisfy an external demand. And in the end, they become very depleted. So they're always helping other people. They're always trying to make other people happy, but they're not attending to their own well-being. And so this idea of self-compassion has arisen as an antidote to that tendency to be trying to find happiness by doing things externally and not doing anything internally. So just another idea to think about.
다 치디기다 난디기 생에디 직소로 등하라 그 섬주체나 치디기 생에디 다 내가 그 디기 줘라 언들 치디기 생에 무슨 책이스 근데 난그 디기 생에디 라랑 그 섬로디 안에 생게 안에 딕베게 주마데 마타 안에 라시 회세체 답에 또 쳐잖아 상계 중된달라 서버갸라 그랬어 서버갸 세데 탐제 캠발라고 그랬어 탐제 캠바 세두고서 안 꿀라 연대요로 송라 연대요로 투라 연대요로스 꿀라네 찬송을 숨상이 베이스모 유튜브에 코란기 투문메베 안 코란기 구이 연대레스 송디 송지 니도 송지나 투만이도 소소코스 원디 코란기 투문메 체조기 송 연대레스 투기 연대데 안에 시전 지다와다 니와 탐제 안 락틴나 큐르라 타원나기 베스 탈레메 통데 거레스 오 딘데가 안에 즉 되게 총수나다 때문에 내가 난게 되기 때문에 총수다디 내 무지치기스.
When we talk about externally derived happiness and internally derived happiness, we can also think that these externally derived happiness are kind of temporary, and internally derived happiness are kind of everlasting. And when we talk about Buddha, we called him omnipresent, omniscient, and so he has perfected the cultivation of happiness with internally derived kind of internally derived happiness.